Russia's war on Ukraine has come closer to spilling over into neighbouring Poland after multiple drones crossed into Polish airspace and were shot down by NATO forces. The incursion during a Russian aerial strike on Ukraine is raising fears about another escalation in the war. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk told Parliament this was the closest the country had been to open conflict since World War II. Some damage was caused by falling debris, but there are no reported casualties. Russia's defence ministry denies targeting Poland, while several European leaders say it was a deliberate provocation. Russia has violated Poland's airspace many times since its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, but never before on this scale. Here are some of the reactions.
There is no reason to believe that we are on the brink of war. But it is undeniable that this provocation goes beyond the previous ones. And it's incomparably more dangerous for Poland than all the others.
There is absolutely no reason to suspect that this was a course correction, error, or anything of the sort. These drones were clearly deliberately set on this course. They would not have had to fly this route to reach Ukraine.
Whether it was intentionally or not, it is absolutely reckless. It is absolutely dangerous. But as I said, the full assessment is ongoing. And to Putin, I mean, my message is clear. Stop the war in Ukraine. Stop the escalating war. Stop violating Allied airspace. And know that we stand ready. That we are vigilant and that we will defend every inch of NATO territory.
We're joined now by Jacek Tarocinski from the Security and Defence Department at the Centre for Eastern Studies in Warsaw. Welcome to DW. What do you think? Was this a Russian mistake or a deliberate provocation?
I think that we have few causes that made last night events. One of them is Russian provocation, of course, because it's play out into broader Russian escalation, as we see it for last not only 3 years in Ukraine, but frankly speaking, since 2014 regarding to Ukraine and our border since 2021. Then we have also the huge Russian campaign in social media right now, especially in Poland, where pre-prepared messages are right now fused into Polish social media sphere in Twitter or Facebook. So we can assess that whole this event that started last evening was pre-planned, and Russia is deliberately trying to test us once again.
Right. So trying to test us with a view to what? What do they want to establish?
So, first of all, they want to showcase the weaknesses of NATO that we successfully do not show. Secondly, they want to divide us in the broader Western alliance and split our differences opinion, insert fear in the hearts of the Western societies to stop supporting not only Poland and broader eastern flank, but also Ukraine. And in the end of the day, they want to test how we respond, how NATO works, and how our chain of command is prepared to deal with larger threat. And last night, I think we showed them that we are prepared and we work quite good.
Yeah, talk us through how that happened. How were those drones brought down?
So, as always, for last 3.5 years, every time when NATO detection systems showcase that Russia is preparing to launch another strategic attack on Ukraine, we scramble our jet fighters, not only Polish national jet fighters F-16s, but also NATO QRF forces that are deployed in Poland. Right now, there are 4 F-35s from Royal Netherlands Air Force. That was also 2 of them was also scrambled. We also put on alert German operate Patriot batteries that are deployed in eastern Poland, and everything is brought together by NATO command, AirCom, and to be more precise, by KAC in West Germany, Uden, that control all airspace activities that are in our region. And deputy commander of this command in Western Germany is Polish officer. We need to stress that. And everything is related to NATO and is commanded by combined efforts of Polish national command staff and also by multinational joint NATO command.
Okay, so there was a machine, and it was tested, and as far as we can tell from the outside, it worked. It seems that a lot of these drones crossed into Poland from Belarus. What does that tell us?
That could tell us that it was pre-planned, because if this drone were derived because of Ukrainian electronic warfare activities or other air defense measures, they would not turn in this maneuver as they did. They flew from Ukraine to Belarus and then from Belarus to Poland. So this incursion to Polish airspace was something new. In last few years, we have drone incursions from Russian or Ukrainian side to Poland that was launched by Russia and tried to attack Ukraine, but there were only one or two these kinds of drones in one night, and this night we have around 19, maybe more, because our military is still searching sites and make sure that our numbers and what we detect is correct. So we put around 12,000 territorial defense soldiers, policemen and firefighters that right now on the ground scanning area for debris and to make sure that every assumption that we made last night was correct.
Okay, and so these drones came from Belarus. Belarus has said that it tracked some drones that, I'm quoting, lost their course because they were jammed. It sounds like you don't believe that's credible.
I think that Lukashenko regime is trying to cover their backs and then want to de-escalate and show that they are not part of this broader Russian escalation. But also it could be a Russian tactic to impose some divisions in our NATO response, because from the Russian side and the Russian perspective, the most important thing is to divide NATO, divide our response. And what we want to achieve is the unified, collective alliance that showcase strength and also resilience in times of crisis.
Okay. This is the first time Russian drones have been shot down over NATO territory. How much of an escalation is this?
It's quite a large escalation. For last 2 years, or maybe even 3 years, our politicians and also generals was very deliberate to not shoot down Russian assets, because we are here in Poland in times of peace. We have peacetime regulations in place, law, and also we don't want to hurt our civilians but by falling debris. But last night our military assessed that drones that incursion to our airspace are a threat to broader Polish state, to Polish critical infrastructure or the cities. And after this assessment was made, they made the decision to shoot them down. So first of all, the escalation is because right now we saw that Russian drones are real threat to us and not only the debris that come from Ukraine or something like that.
Okay, so the immediate machine has worked. Now we get into what does NATO do about these incursions. Poland has invoked NATO's Article 4. Just explain to us what that means.
That means that NATO leaders and NATO Atlantic Council is meeting right now and talk about what we're supposed to do next. From Polish perspective, we want more NATO assets in Poland, more jet fighters, more air defenses, and stronger voice in terms of cohesion response. NATO Article 4 was enacted 8 times in NATO history, 5 times by Turkey after incursion of their airspace. during the Syrian civil war, and 3 times by Poland and other eastern flank countries. Right now we have the 3rd time where Poland invoked Article 4 in history, and 8 times when NATO invoked as a whole. And this is the way we are trying to go. We want to build the cohesion and unity against this Russian escalation.
Thanks for talking us through that, Jacek. Jacek Tarocinski from the Centre for Eastern Studies in Warsaw. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Well, today's Russian incursion into Poland was top of the agenda here in Berlin, where German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has just held a press conference. Our political correspondent Bernd Riegert can tell us more. Welcome, Bernd. What's the German Chancellor been saying?
Friedrich Merz was very concerned, and he said that Russia is endangering lives in Poland and on NATO territory. He called the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk to express his support. And after that call, he answered to a question from our correspondent Nina Hase.
I share the assessment that this is a very serious threat to peace across all of Europe. This is a new kind of attack that we are seeing from Russia. I also share his assessment that the Russian government's claim that this was supposedly an accident or a mistake is not credible.
So notably, the Chancellor talked about a new quality of attacks, and he said clearly that is intentional. This is a little bit contradictory to the stance that we heard from NATO today. Not only he, but also the foreign minister and the defense minister all came forward with dire warnings that Russia might try to escalate even further.
And how nervous are German politicians about what happened overnight?
Well, to be honest, my impression is that they are really nervous because the question is how to answer this Russian escalation, or the testing of the West, if you will. What can NATO countries actually do militarily, and will they really engage in an open conflict with Russia? So this is the question that has to be answered, and Germans so far, of course, shied away from answering that very consequently, and now we have to see how that develops.
All right, and so what are we expecting in the coming days?
Well, the Chancellor also said that the NATO air defense is not sufficient, although some drones were shot down, but it is not sufficient in his view. And he said we have to talk about it. NATO has to talk about it and to come up with a swift solution how to support and buttress this air defense systems. And where shall they come from? That is unclear. So I think that there are also some calls over the Atlantic are necessary to ask for more help and reassurances from the US military.
Thanks for that, Bernd. DW correspondent Bernd Riegert.
And our coverage continues now with Jacek Rosencrantz. She's Sweden's Minister for European Union Affairs. She's currently here in Berlin. She joins me now from our parliamentary studios. Madam Minister, it's good to have you with us. Let me ask you, does your government agree that this was a deliberate Russian action and not an accident?
Thank you. Well, our information indicates that this was intentional, but I would say regardless, intentional or not, this underscores what many of us have been saying for a long time, that Russia's aggression is not only a threat to Ukraine, but to the entire European security and all of us as European countries. And this is the violation of the Polish airspace is totally unacceptable, and we stand fully behind Poland, and we are of course also in contact with the Polish government in various ways.
You say that the EU stands behind Poland. How can the EU support NATO members like Poland in responding to security threats on the borders?
I think we will see a discussion now moving forward of on what exact conclusions we will draw from this and what actions that should be carried out. But from the Swedish government's point of view, it's important to see that we all need to stand united in our response to the Russian aggression in Ukraine and in the threat that Russia poses to the European security. And you know, of course, this is unacceptable in all ways, the violation of Polish airspace. But let us also be reminded that this is what is happening on a daily basis in Ukraine, and that this all comes down ultimately to us as the European Union and as member countries to really be strong in our support to Ukraine and increase pressure on Russia so as to make sure that we get an end to the Russian aggression. And I think this is my focus moving forward, making sure that we all realize that what is also happening on the battlefields of Ukraine is existential to all of us. It's a moral obligation to help Ukraine, but it is also about European security.
I understand that the European Union is considering a new sanctions package against Russia after adopting many others in recent months. Are economic sanctions, are they enough given the kind of escalation that we have seen in the last 24 hours?
Well, they are one important tool, I would say, even though Russia tries to pretend that these sanctions don't make a difference. We do know that they hurt the Russian economy and ultimately Russia's possibility of waging its war. So Sweden will continue to push for new sanctions when it comes to targeting energy revenues, when it comes to the shadow fleet. I think this is really important to continue to put pressure on Russia, but also ramping up our support to Ukraine. And we know now that Europe is the largest provider of support to Ukraine. Sweden is number 5 in relation to GDP in the world when it comes to military support to Ukraine. This makes me very proud, but I know that also all countries in Europe need to preserve our support, but also do even more going forward.
Yeah, I'm aware that Sweden is one of the largest financial supporters of Ukraine. There are other EU countries that seem less engaged here. How do you assess EU solidarity when it comes to Ukraine and the war against Russia?
I think that the EU stands strongly behind Ukraine, and many countries direct substantial amounts of support to Ukraine in many ways, which is important. But I think that we continuously need to see what we can do more, and especially moving forward. I mean, we realize that Ukraine will have need of financial and military assistance for a long time in various ways, both military here and now, but also one day for reconstruction and budgetary support for the coming years. I think we will have to have a more frank discussion among EU countries. How should we finance this? I mean, Sweden is using our budget support, but I think we also need to look at using, for example, the immobilized assets, the frozen assets, making sure that Russia also pays for the damage that they have caused in Ukraine. This and many other possibilities, I think we will have to have an even more frank discussion about among EU member countries going forward.
Madam Minister, you know that since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, your country, Sweden, has undergone a major shift from a neutral, non-aligned country to a full-fledged NATO member. How threatened do Swedes feel by Russia, particularly considering what happened in the last 24 hours?
I think that we cannot be naive when it comes to Russia. No one can. I think Swedes for a long time have realized that Russia is a threat to our security, but since the full-scale invasion, it has definitely become obvious for each and every one. And we need to take this into full account. We need to ramp up our own defense investments in all countries. Sweden is doing this now. We're taking the necessary, sometimes tough, but necessary decisions to reach the new NATO target, about 3.5% in military spending, 5% in total. Of course, this is difficult for many countries. We know that this competes with a lot of other different important budgetary necessities, but we need to take these important decisions because the cost of doing nothing is even higher.
Let me ask you before we run out of time, if there were any doubts in your country about joining NATO and the decision to do that, would you say that what we saw in Poland, in Polish airspace last night, Did that remove all those doubts? I mean, can you say now, yes, we did the right thing by joining NATO?
I mean, we've had a discussion for many years about joining NATO, but I would say that after the full-scale invasion, we saw huge supports, both among political parties in parliament, but also among public in joining NATO. And we feel more secure today as a NATO member than we did before joining the alliance. So that makes me very secure that we are both NATO members, but that we also have the possibility within EU to make necessary decisions on ramping up defense investments or using EU funds to make sure that Europe as a whole ramps up investments in security and defense.
Mm-hmm. Swedish Minister for EU Affairs, Jacek Rosencrantz. Madam Minister, we appreciate your time today. We appreciate you talking with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's pick up some of those points with Oscar Luigi Guccione. He's a Warsaw-based program assistant with the German Marshall Fund, focusing on Central and Eastern Europe. But welcome to DW. If this was a deliberate Russian provocation, if this was a test, how did NATO do?
Hello, thank you for having me. And yeah, that's I think the first question that we are all asking ourselves. I would say that NATO did very well. We have to remember that we are currently not at the same situation of Ukraine, right? We are not at war with Russia directly. We are in a hybrid war, of course, especially on the eastern flank, as we are seeing now for many years, even before the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. But last night, NATO behaved as an alliance. Poland was not alone. And even though 19 Russian drones entered the Polish airspace, several were in fact shot down thanks to, as we heard already, the Allies' airplanes. And airports were quickly closed. There were no casualties likely. So this is the first on-territory shutdown in a NATO country, of course. And this is concerning in a way that is a serious gray zone probe, of course, that Russia and Belarus are, of course, exploiting to put more tension and pressure on the allies. But Polish and /NATO procedures worked: the detention, right, temporary closure, intercepts, consultation.
Okay, so there was a plan. The plan worked. So the question then becomes, what comes next? Well, the Ukrainian foreign minister has been on social media. He says a weak response now will provoke Russia even more, and then Russian missiles and drones will fly even further into Europe. So do you believe this sort of Russian action now requires a NATO response that goes beyond words and meetings and sanctions?
Well, most definitely, I would say. I think I would distinguish between immediate and strategic response. In terms of immediate, as we have heard already, Article 4 has been triggered, basically. So this will show unity. This is Poland saying this is not just our problem. This is a NATO problem. And in a way, obliging, right, the allies, making it our problem, 32 countries' problem. In terms of immediate steps to be taken, of course, is to have a one real-time view of the skies, a full positional layered air defenses, pre-delegated engagement rules, disciplined joint messaging, in a way that the next probes that we're going to encounter will be handled even better than this time, since we know that already many drones are very hard to detect when they are flying at the lower level.
So how worried are you about what looks like an escalation in Russian provocations?
I'm not worried. I'm concerned, of course, because the situation is serious, has been serious for the last 4 years. In Poland, in different cases, we felt that the situation was more or less serious, but NATO, in this first few hours, is showing unity. That is exactly what we need to show towards Russia. Russia is probing us, our capabilities, but also it's stressing our cohesion, internal cohesion. As far as we show strength and unity, there is nothing I'm actually worried about in terms of further escalation on NATO's country's territory.
Thanks for talking us through that, Oscar. Oscar Luigi Guccione from the German Marshall Fund. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's great to welcome Kristine Berzina back to DW now. She heads geostrategy for Northern Europe, the Arctic and North America at the German Marshall Fund. Tell us, Kristine, why do you think Russia did this and why now?
Russia is, first of all, trying to buy time so that it can achieve more military measures for itself, more territory gains in Ukraine, and it wants to make the peace process further away. The Europeans are seeking to provide future security guarantees to Ukraine, and Putin is showing through the attacks in Ukraine and this brazen violation of Polish airspace that it is also willing, that Russia is also willing to intimidate Poland and other NATO allies. There's also timing that is tied to the Zapad, major Western military exercises that Russia is doing in Belarus, starting in these weeks. This is a way that Russia is able to mobilize and bring a lot of its forces into Belarusian territory and also have power projections to the neighbors. These are scheduled much in advance, they are expected, and yet the full spectrum of activity that you can see in any exercise is a bit unpredictable. So the alignment between the big situation in Ukraine and the presence of more Russian troops in Belarus creates the perfect opportunity for tests like these, for a show of more forward-leaning aggression against NATO.
OK, and if it's putting NATO to the test, is NATO passing or failing the test?
The fact that these drones were shot down is a very good sign. They're a passive observation of them passing through would not have been giving NATO very high marks. If we look back after the Crimean invasion, there in Turkey, Russian fighter jets crossed Turkish airspace and Turkey shot them down. And even though there was a short-term bad nature of a relationship between Russia and Turkey, that has settled down since. That kind of bravery to protect airspace and to protect sovereignty is incredibly necessary to show Russia where the real red lines are. So to have the scramble come after these drones was very good. But the thing is, drones are cheap and plentiful, and fighter jets and air defense systems, Patriot systems, are expensive and fewer. And so the question is, what is the West going to do in this drone era against drones coming from Russia? The West has never had to deal with attacks from drones in the same way that Ukraine has, and it is not yet ready to have drone walls or other anti-drone measures in place at the scale that Ukraine does. It shows again that the West needs to do more, it needs to be more prepared against the kind of invasions it might face.
And what does some of those preparations, what should that look like? How should NATO respond, given what you've just said, without, of course, itself escalating the war in Ukraine?
Well, certainly understanding that drone warfare is part of contemporary warfare and isn't something that is going to be simply limited to Ukraine, that drone warfare is something that can come to NATO countries. And then drones can knock out drones, but then you need to have militaries on the NATO side that are very well equipped and have plentiful drones of their own in order to be able to take them out. There's also a question of electronic warfare and how well the West is able to use this itself. We see that Russia uses this very much, and also in the Ukrainian war. So these are the newer kind of tactics that maybe weren't part of the playbook of what NATO thought it would be dealing with just a few years ago, and those lessons need to be taken on sooner. But also being very public in this condemnation of Russia and its accelerated aggression is incredibly important, including important to maintain the attention of President Trump, to show who is the good guy, who is defending territory, and which country is the one that is seeking to poke people in the eye.
Just briefly, you mentioned Trump there. What about the US reaction? Because we've heard very little from Trump about this today.
Today is a day in which Trump is not going to be thinking a lot about foreign policy. Because of the Charlie Kirk murder that we saw in Utah, the attention of Washington, the attention of Donald Trump is going to be on domestic matters, on this question of political violence. And it's a coincidence, of course, that the incursions into Poland and this murder happened on the same day. But this is going to result in a more muted response from Washington. It's going to give Russia more freedom to continue being aggressive because Washington is going to be distracted.
Thanks so much for that, Kristine. That's Kristine Berzina from the German Marshall Fund. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the Europeans are all in on this. How is Washington reacting? Our correspondent Janelle Dumalaon is there. Welcome, Janelle. What are you hearing?
Well, in a phrase, Phil, not a whole lot just yet coming from the White House. We did see that Truth Social post from the president earlier today where he said, "What's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go." Now, we cannot say, of course, exactly what that means. It is some vague gesture towards consequences for Russia, what those consequences could be. We obviously do not know that yet, but it is an indication that he does consider these Russian violations despite Russia's denials. But of course, there is pressure for the U.S. president to respond, not just from allied countries in Europe, but also within the country as well. There has been a lot of bipartisan alarm over this, both Republicans and Democrats expressing concern, with at least one congressman calling this incursion an act of war. You also have the likes of Democratic Senator Dick Durbin saying that this incursion is a test of U.S. resolve to protect Poland and other Baltic nations. You also have the likes of Republican Senator Lindsey Graham using this occasion to renew a call to get the Russia sanctions package passed. That is, of course, this package that will impose a 500% tariff on countries that buy Russian energy. So when Donald Trump says, "Here we go," of course, the entire nation and, of course, the entire world wants to know, here we go with what? And at this particular moment, Phil, we are still waiting for an answer.
OK, so Poland has invoked Article 4 of the NATO treaty, that is consultations across the alliance. How's President Trump expected to respond?
Well, the minimum of what we can expect is a statement of support for Poland. We know that he has a call with the Polish president today. He's, of course, expected to express support for those Article 4 consultations. We also heard from the U.S. ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, earlier today, saying that the U.S. will defend every inch of NATO airspace, that the U.S. stands by its allies in the face of this Russian incursion. Important also to note that the Polish president was here last week meeting with Donald Trump. And in that meeting, Trump told him that the U.S. was with Poland, quote, all the way. He also indicated that he was open to sending more U.S. troops to Poland on top of the 10,000 or so U.S. troops that are already there, reinforcing the eastern flank of NATO. But, you know, this is Trump. And given his attempts to burnish his credentials as a peacemaker, as somebody who could bring an end to conflicts, it might also be likely that he could temper any criticism of this Russian incursion with a statement towards wanting to prevent escalation or wanting to prevent a World War III. And really the question here is whether he could be able to find a response that does not undermine U.S. or NATO credibility, especially just weeks after he hosted President Vladimir Putin right here on U.S. soil with what we can see now was very little result.
OK, thanks for that, Janelle. Janelle Dumalaon in Washington.